notes for the algebra review of factoring lesson 4. We skipped from lesson 1 to lesson 4 because I put lessons 1, 2, and 3 all together as one, just factoring in general. And then this is where we get into the solving portion. So we can solve quadratic equations by factoring, and we're going to talk more about this in chapter 5. But I just want to review what you learned in algebra so that we can strengthen those skills before we get into solving quadratics in chapter 5. So if you recall, a quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So your quadratic equation, notice we have an x squared that tells us it's quadratic. We have a trinomial, which means we have 3 terms, and it's equal to 0. So the zeroth product property just tells us that a times b equals 0, then either a or b has to be equal to 0. So to solve quadratic equations by factoring, we first have to factor, and we know that either set of factors needs to be equal to 0 in order for the equation to be equal to 0. So either x plus 1 has to be equal to 0, or x minus 2 has to be equal to 0. So our two solutions could be either -1 or +2, our solutions to the equation. So we're going to look at how to do that, how to solve by factoring. So for examples A and B, we are just solving. Notice the equations are equal to 0. They're all factored, and we're just going to look at what that looks like. So if we have, for solving by factoring, notice we have the factors, so we're going to set each of these equal to 0. So we have x minus 2 equals 0, 3x plus 1 equals 0, and x plus 5 equals 0, because again, one of these sets has to be equal to 0 in order for our equation to be equal to 0. So to get x by itself, we add 2, so x equals 2. For the second equation, subtract 1, 3x equals -1. We divide by 3, x equals -1/3. For the last equation, we subtract 5, so x equals -5. So 2, -1/3, and -5 are our 3 possible solutions. For part B, again, we set each part equal to 0 for our equation. So we have 2s equals 0. We also have s plus 3 equals 0. So to solve for s, we're going to divide by 2. So s equals 0. For the second one, we're going to subtract 3. So s equals -3. And again, either of these solutions will work. The second part of our notes, we are factoring and solving. So notice we have trinomials here. They are not factored. We need to factor first and then solve. So we have x squared minus 10x plus 9 equals 0. Notice we have a trinomial. The first thing we want to look for is a greatest common factor. Notice we don't have one of those, so we're going to set up our t. Remember, our factors of x squared go in the first column, so that's going to be x and x. On the right-hand side, we have factors of 9. Now notice that our middle term is a -10x, so both of our terms for 9 are going to be negative. So we have 1 and 9 that we could use, and 3 and 3. We know that 1 and 9 will give us our -10 that we're looking for. We cross multiply to check. So x times -9 is -9x. X times -1 is -x, and that gives us our -10x that we are looking for. So our factors are x minus 1 times x minus 9, and that's equal to 0. Again, we need to set each set equal to 0. So x minus 1 equals 0, and x minus 9 equals 0. So I'm going to add 1 to get x equals 1. I'm going to add 9. So x equals 9 or x equals 1 are our two solutions. Go down to part B, x squared minus 9x plus 18 equals 0. Again, look for a common factor first. Notice we do not have one. So next thing you're going to notice is that we have a trinomial, so you're going to set up your t. On the left-hand side, factors of our first term, so x squared is x and x. On the right-hand side, factors of 18. So we have 1 and 18. 2 and 9, 3 and 6. Our middle term needs to be a negative 9x, so again they're both going to be negative. We know that 6 plus 3 is 9, so I'm going to try 6 and 3. I cross multiply, negative 3x minus 6x gives us our negative 9x. So our factors, x minus 6, x minus 3 equals 0. So set them both equal to 0. If I add 6 to both sides, x equals 6. If I add 3 to both sides, x equals 3. So our two possible solutions are 3 and 6. For part C, we have x squared minus 7x minus 12. Now notice here our equation is not equal to 0. Before we can solve, we have to set it equal to 0. So we need to add 12 to both sides. So that gives us x squared minus 7x plus 12 equals 0. Look for a common factor first. Notice we do not have one. Second thing we need to look for is that we have a trinomial. So we're going to set up our t. Again, factors on the left-hand side are going to be x and x. On the right-hand side, we're looking for factors of 12. Notice our middle term is negative, so they're both going to be negative. I know that 3 and 4 equals 7, so if I cross multiply, negative 3x minus 4x gives me my negative 7x. So my factors are x minus 3, x minus 4. Set both of those equal to 0. And x equals 3 and x equals 4 are our two solutions. So again, your equation must be equal to 0 before we can solve. And for part D, again, you should notice the same. It's not equal to 0 yet, so we need to subtract 25 from both sides. So we get x squared minus 25 equals 0. Now notice we have first we're looking for greatest common factor. Do we have a greatest common factor? If you said no, you are correct. Next thing we need to look for is if we have a trinomial. We don't have a trinomial, but we have a binomial. Now if we have a binomial, we know this is the same as saying x squared plus 0x minus 25. So again, we can set up our t. So we have x and x, factors of negative 25, going to be 5 and negative 5. If we cross multiply, notice we get that 0x that we're looking for. So we get x plus 5 and x minus 5. Now you may also notice that this is your perfect square problem. So if you don't notice that you have perfect squares right away, then you can use the trinomial method as well. So then we're going to set both of these equal to 0. So x equals negative 5 and x equals 5 are our two solutions. So again, in general, when you're factoring, you're first looking for a greatest common factor. You're next looking for perfect squares. If so, you're going to use your perfect square formula. If you have a trinomial, you're going to set up your t. And remember, before you can solve, your equation has to be equal to 0.